We are 6 days away from a change of government in the United States. Just 6 days away from when the President of the United States goes from bumbling Biden to a bloke who was at the peak of his powers in Donald Trump. Now, you remember one of the things that we learned out of the American election was that the polls are not quite gospel. Remember how we were told uphill and down dale that it was close and super close, and even I was telling you at times things were super close. The reality, of course, he won the popular vote, he won all of the swing states, and he is back with a thumping majority in the Senate and control of the House as well. Well, what do the bookies say about the battle here in Australia? First week that we're back on the air, first real week of the election season as we get ready for one that'll happen in the next couple of months. Well, the battle between the Prime Minister and the alternative Prime Minister, interestingly, is one where the bookies are telling us currently Labor is in a world of trouble, and believe it or not, the actual favourite right now, the coalition. Let's have a look at a whole collection of the bookies that have put their numbers forward. Labor currently is $2.10 and the coalition is the favourite according to Sportsbet at $1.72. The same margin for the people after the election will be Peter Dutton. The TAB ever so slightly better for the Labor Party, but still showing that the favourite. 3 different bookies, and again, bookies could be wrong. Famously, one of them was very wrong in 2019, but the bookies were so right. In and around the American election, this is going to be my North Star to push through much of the garbage that is there. Also worth noting here too is that we have a start to this election year where we have a Prime Minister who's trying to buy his way out of trouble, an announcement a day, millions here, billions there, and Peter Dutton, who is focusing on values. Now, again, I've got some data for you in a second that's going to help explain how these two teams are prosecuting the early days. But while Peter Dutton is talking about big things like a national day, how it should be enshrined in law, how councils should lose their capacity to basically do anything other than do it on the 26th or don't do it at all. But the Prime Minister, he is playing a very old school game here, which is turn up somewhere and throw money at a problem. Now, Tasmania is a place where the Labor Party holds 2 seats, the Liberal Party holds 1 seat, and then an independent, of course, holds the other. The expectation is that if they lose a seat like Braddon or Lyons, the 2 that Labor currently holds, then, of course, things get worse for the government. They move into minority. Things get better for the bookies' favourite in Peter Dutton. Well, today, the Prime Minister was in Tasmania announcing more money. This time, Davenport, $6 million to events that are there. Why? It's a way of trying to hold on to the seat. But again, does anyone remember this announcement in a couple of days' time? This is on top of the more than $10 billion which have been announced thus far when it comes to the NBN or roads. And as we went through in chapter and verse last night, when it comes to priorities, well, I have no doubt that things are needed in Davenport or Nowra, as they have been, and certainly the Bruce Highway, which should have been dealt with years ago, let alone 3 years ago, let alone 5 years into the future. We live in a country where, as I told you last night, 1 in 3 people are struggling at the moment as parents to pay for their school costs, and people are now turning to maxing out their credit card or going to the old-fashioned bank of grandma or grandpa to try to find a way to pay for those school expenses. If the Prime Minister's got $6 million to try to hold in a marginal seat, surely he's got millions of dollars to take care of the charity sector. I'm going to keep talking about this. They should be cracking off hundreds of millions of dollars for the charity sector that is taking care of people right now. They have to be making it easier for the people who are the parents of the kids who are financially struggling to make sure that they do not fall behind in confidence or in any other way when they go to school. Prime Minister, it's up to you. You can hold a press conference a day with an announcement nobody will remember, or you can do something that will actually make people's lives better. But I mentioned before about the data part of this, and you know that when it comes to this show, I try to show you the information, the data from a neutral source, and yes, there's a lot of opinion that I will put in and around it. Put simply, the data are the bricks of the argument, the mortar is the opinion, and hopefully it becomes a wall on which lies crash, to go all John Dutton on you, as I quickly remember that show, Yellowstone. Well, interestingly today, the Australian Financial Review pulled out the speeches, every speech, every press conference which has been made by both the Prime Minister and by Peter Dutton since the start of this election year. And they put it through the old computer and they used a bit of AI here. AI analysis shows that the Prime Minister most frequently is using adjectives to paint a more positive vision, including words such as good, important and successful to describe his government. Meantime, Peter Dutton says weak, incompetent, the worst and shameful are among his most colourful and repeated adjectives to describe both the Prime Minister and the government as the weakest since Federation, while describing himself as a strong leader who would fix the problems. Now, let me explain why this is particularly interesting. Because you see, if the Prime Minister is to win this election, then Australia has to believe that he is a government that has made the country better in the past 3 years. No evidence of that. And if he was to be given even more power into the future, then, of course, he would continue to build the narrative. But the reality is that Australians are much closer to where Peter Dutton is, which is why the bookies are suggesting that there may well be a shock result at the upcoming federal election. In fact, let me show you this here, because there's a whole bunch of polls that are worth showing you. A whole collection of polls that show here about the right and wrong direction of the country. Now, this one is from the Roy Morgan people, and it came out this week, that just 30.5% of people believe the country is headed in the right direction. 54% of people say it's headed in the wrong direction. That number of 30 and a bit is basically the primary vote of the Labor Party right now. But let me show you some more here as we have a look at our next slide from the Essential Research Group. These are the people who come out and the Guardian polls will often be there. You can see that the right track for the country is just 31%, basically the same as the previous one. And the wrong track is currently at 51%. But then there is this one that I really have to show you, which is, can you name one thing that the federal government has done to make your life financially better? 73% of people can't say. 73% of people can't name one thing. Not too little, too late tax cuts, not all of the other stuff that they claim has made massive changes when it comes to cost of living. And when you actually break this down even more, let me show you this. All voters, 73%, can't name a single thing the government's done. Labor voters, 36% of them say you can name something, but that's the best the government goes. We're back to 78% of people who didn't want this government in the first place, 70% of people who give their preferences to this government, 79% of people who vote One Nation. This is an indication that their preferences most likely go back to the Liberal Party, like they did in 2019, Liberal win, versus what happened in 2022, and others, which can be everything from the Libertarians through to the Teals, 76%. Also something that shows you about who is winning the early days, and while the Prime Minister might be out there trying to do the Lefty Jedi mind trick, that everything's okay and he's a builder and your life is better than it was 3 years ago, when you know your life has been much worse over the past 3 years. And why would you reward the people who, remember, promised to make it better? Not in the never, never. They promised in 2022. Well, we know that in 2023, they took $1,500 off 10 million working Australians. And things have got worse through, of course, 2024. And now, as we move our way to 2025, there have been 12 interest rate rises under this mob. And even if the Reserve Bank does what, fingers crossed, we all hope it does, in the upcoming meeting of pulling it back, you've still got the effective pressure of those 3 years and a dozen interest rate rises, which will not clear by the time of the election. But again, some of the analysis that was done by the Financial Review today was the Prime Minister loves talking about himself.
Me, myself, me.
In fact, they actually counted it. And God love them for doing so, because they saved me the trouble, right? The data shows that Mr Albanese has used first-person pronouns such as I, me or my more frequently than Mr Dutton. In fact, 443 times since the start of the year he has said I, me or my, compared to just 82 that are there for the alternative Prime Minister. Which brings us to the analysis, again inside this article, but a person who will be a guest on this program once the tennis is done and we get up into the full run towards the election. Sunday nights, by the way, is going to be a particular focus when Kos Samaras and Michael Kroger are going to get right into the state of the race. And I don't just mean the polls, I mean the stuff behind the polls, the machine. It's going to be a big thing. Sunday night, each and every Sunday night here on Paul Murray Live. Well, Kos Samaras, of course, is a former Labor pollster He's helped the Teals out in the past, but he runs a polling mob called Redbridge. This is what he says about the slogans. At the moment, Labor has a lot more work to do to make sure that its slogan works. Kind of the same as my view, which is if the opinion polls are all saying the country's heading in the wrong direction, a government saying send us back because we've put it in the right direction, they're only where about a third of the country is. What's missing is meaningful policy action. The PM just doesn't have the ballast, being the policy record or reform. Put simply, that's a polite way of saying. Nothing got better in the past 3 years. What can he point to? Yes, he can point to some rather significant legislation when it comes to things like public housing. He can point to too little, too late tax cuts, but remember the people most in need of those were the people who got the least. People on $45,000 a year were getting $14 a week. Oh, but we've done something about power bills. Wasn't the promise by 2025 they'd be down by $275? Well, of course, they have gone way up. And inflation is only being artificially held down by government handouts that mean $300 a year, or more importantly, $25 a month, is being knocked off the bills, not by reducing the cost of the electricity, but just by paying the electricity companies to knock $25 a month off your bill. Meantime, Mr Samaras says about Peter Dutton and his start to the year, his messaging, how his messaging matches up with the polls, matches up with the bookies, and matches up with the mood of the country. The same part of the country that turned on the Liberal Party just 3 years ago, that turned on the Labor Party, 12 years ago, that turned on John Howard back in 2007, that sliver of Australia, 5 to 10%, that flipped one way or the other. Dutton is tapping into an underlying sentiment that the country seems rudderless, and Albanese is not a strong leader. The mindset that the next 5 to 10 years are very uncertain, and in those times you need a strong leader. Dutton's slogan, which of course is putting the country back on track, capitalises on a lot of low-hanging fruit. But as always, my friends in the press gallery, oh, don't they love this program, and have for the better part of 15 years. Now, occasionally there are some exceptions, and I'm sorry to throw them all in together, but generally speaking, 7 out of 10 are all cheering for this government to find its mojo. And while I am an opinion host, and you expect opinion to come from me, it is weird when people who claim to be independent reporters tell us pretty obviously which side they're going to be batting for. Now, a significant figure in news over at Channel 10 is Hugh Rimmington, formerly over at Channel 9. And he's sort of in and out of the political sphere at the moment, but he decided not to write on the 10 website, but to write on the Turnbull Times today, giving free advice to the Prime Minister about how he could save his backside. Why would any independent journalist be sitting and telling one side of politics how to win, unless, of course, they want that team to win? Anthony Albanese couldn't sell a schooner to a shearer. And there's plenty of criticism in the article, but he says, what would Nick Xenophon do? Put simply, more stunts, and that's the way that he would be able to connect with people. And presumably, if he was able to connect with people, then his message would start to work and he would win an election. Again, I never hide that this is an opinion program. It's been loud, proud and strong for as long as we've been on the air, and all my life before and after. But these people are the ones who look down on programs like this, who look down on viewers like you who have strong opinions, who look down on this channel for having strong opinions. Once the sun starts to disappear at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, all the way through to reader at 11 o'clock. But that's a taste of the people who are going to be, well, the independent arbiters of what the news of the day is. One who's telling you over at Channel 10 that he'd really like a closer fight because, God forbid, Australians got rid of the greatest Prime Minister of all time.